Alright guys, so welcome back to episode 2. Today we're going to be talking about a couple of different things. As you can see, today's layout is a little different, actually set up in my soon-to-be podcast room, but I have a couple of important components around me, and the second video is pretty much going to go into deep description on what happened. You guys saw the car on the tow truck, so you see that there's definitely some kind of failure, and I kind of want to get into briefly the diagnosis process, the symptoms that we had, and leading up to what exactly failed on the vehicle, and again just going through all the concerns. So first things first, I picked up the vehicle, driving completely fine. Everything was cool. Went and got gas, a couple of pulls here and there. The car was shipped from Puerto Rico. Again, Carlos had it over there. And well, after pumping gas, we decided to go stop at Whataburger up in Jacksonville. I did a pull to pass someone, and I felt a little bit of the vehicle kind of being held back, like it wasn't giving me its full capabilities. So as I kind of pull in, before I even pull in, got on a couple pulls, downshifted and rolled into it, and it felt like it was kind of holding back, but it would also, crazy dog, it would also kind of open up. So I felt like something was weird. Sure enough, as soon as we get down kind of to like an idle speed and roll into the lot, the car is kind of misfiring, and as I come to a spot, I shut it off thinking maybe it was an ignition coil problem or kind of like a light misfire, but no. I'm filming a video. So I kind of just start to inspect under the hood, any hoses for any major boost leaks that may have occurred during the pull. Didn't find anything. However, I did find on the back side of the valve cover, which actually this is the cylinder head to the car right here. What better than to show you than having it off of the car so you guys can get a full clear view on exactly what all happened and what I saw. So as you can see on the back side here, I noticed that the PCV valve, which goes in that little hole, was missing. Interesting enough for me to wonder what happened. Where'd it go? How'd it go anywhere? My cousin, which was driving behind me, Chris, which comes out in the first episode, he mentions that he saw a puff of black smoke come out and he saw a component fly off of the vehicle. So that must have been the part that he seen fly off. I tried kind of like plugging it with my finger, but it wouldn't, the car still wouldn't start. So we had no choice but to get the car towed back over home. Once I get the car back home, just kind of looking over everything, we figured out that, yeah, we knew the PCV was missing, but how? What caused that? There were many things then that we saw and figured out, but most importantly, we really wanted to get into a fair diagnosis, and I think the most important part of figuring out more so what happened is why it happened. And so we were quickly able to see that, or suspect that there may have been some boost pressure in this valve cover. Possibly suspected it could have been a head gasket issue. But hey, I ordered a PCV valve, popped that in, came in, the car started to idle and ran. Idled really poorly, but was definitely running a whole lot better than it was initially. I pulled the plugs on the car. Once I get all the plugs out, inspect them, and the plugs were pretty foul. For a mixture of reasons, those were the original plugs that Carlos had seen ran. It's kind of going through the break-in process, and also multiple tuning and dyno sessions on those plugs were set, and there was also an issue with a couple of map sensors being disconnected, causing like a rich condition, hence the black spark plugs. So next step was I got a set of plugs onto the car. Sure enough, I get them in, car starts to idle, pretty damn good. Small stumble at very low RPM, kind of like around the bounce between like 800 and 900 RPM. And that was the only thing that kind of, I guess, made me question if there was anything else going on with the car. After that, the car seems to have gone into limp mode. So when I go on an initial test drive after the plugs, the car just wasn't coming into boost. So it was definitely weird. And also had an issue where it just kind of felt like it was held up. And granted, the turbo pressure was not there, so at this point it was a 1.5 or 1.6 naturally aspirated. So that's another thing about this engine. It's going to be pretty unique as you guys start to go through with me in the build process. Is this engine has been bored over, and based on all the measurements we've done, machine chopped, all the work that we've had, instead of a 1.5, this now is a 1.6. Pretty cool, a little different and unique, but with unique and being different comes a set of challenges, and we'll talk about those later on in the video. So immediately I jumped to think that perhaps there may be an issue with the turbo. I said, well, maybe that puff of smoke that my cousin saw come out of the back of the vehicle was maybe the turbo blew, who knows. Sure enough, removed the turbo inlet pipe, got access to the inlet side. I didn't see any shaft play. The compressor wheel seemed to be intact, so everything was fine. Definitely moved that out of my process of elimination. Made sure that was all a-okay, put it all back together, drove the car. It was coming into boost, but I felt in between revving up and just kind of getting into boost and boost actually kicking in at full boost, there was like a hesitation. Not a stumble, not a misfire, but it just felt like the engine was struggling to get up in RPM. And that further continued my diagnosis as to believing that something was wrong, because the car didn't feel that way until the incident. So the next thing that we noticed one night looking at the car is I could have almost swore I saw a mixture of oil and coolant in the oil, and even saw oil in the coolant. The coolant in the oil in the coolant. Checked the expansion tank and it seemed to look oily, but pulled the dipstick and it looked kind of milkshakey. And at that point, I had pretty much determined, okay, this is definitely some kind of failure internal to the engine, nothing of the accessories on the engine. At this point, I figured, hey, it's time to pull the head off and see what happened. I think maybe about a couple months go by. At this point, I'm just kind of down, right? Because I buy this car and the first day that I get it, I've already done significant damage to where now I have to disassemble the engine. I drained the oil. I wanted to see the oil, see if I saw any metal shards. I saw no metal shards. And I didn't see any milkshake. Interesting. I inspected the coolant again, and the coolant was crystal clear blue. So I don't know if our minds were playing tricks on us that day, but for whatever reason, it was all a-okay. Dropped the oil, all that's fine. Checked the coolant level, it was a little low. Fill it up, that was fine. Take the car for a drive again. Still feeling that strong lack in power right in between those 2 RPMs. Also was hearing very loud backfires. So something's not right with the car. So eventually I get down to one last conclusion. I said at this point I need to do a compression test on this engine and see if the compression is good. Then I have somewhere else to rule out an issue, possibly high pressure fuel pump issue or a fuel delivery, figure out what's going on. But the crazy thing is, check engine light was never on, and never been on, no codes, no nothing. So definitely a concern. It was a little bit of it was a little alerting, trying to figure out where exactly everything was occurring. So do a compression test. Here are the compression results. As you can see, I have 2 cylinders that are fairly low on compression. And to give you an idea, if you aren't aware of what compression is, there's an intake valve and then there's an exhaust valve, and they open and close. The intake lets air in, the exhaust lets air out. As they close, and the piston, which is right here, comes up, essentially it compresses that air and fuel and combusts. Essentially it's just a tight area in the combustion chamber where all the combustion process occurs. So if you have any loss in compression, the engine is not going to perform right, because you have an issue somewhere, whether it is a bent valve, which possibly I thought. You can have an issue with the block, you can have an issue with the piston, you can have so many issues. But I think the first step was figuring out if compression was good, and it wasn't, as you can see. So at this point, I knew I had to tear down the engine and find out what exactly happened. So with the help of my buddy George, we were able to pull the head off of the engine and see what was going on. Here are some of the images on the stuff that I found, the issues that occurred, and what pretty much we believed happened. So initially we removed the head, inspected the head gasket, immediately found the point of failure, and that is this area right here. Problem with running this style head gasket, which is the OEM, it is a multi-layer steel gasket. Whenever these head gaskets fails, there's a high probability that there may be damage done to the cylinder head and or the block. Because the gasket is made of metal, when combustion leaks through the gasket, the heat on the gasket can leave a printing or a mark on either or of the surfaces. So we had on both. We had a marking on the cylinder head, as we as well had on the block. Once we noticed the damage, the head could have been machined. Excellent. We're gonna send that to the machine shop, but the block had a very, very small nick, and it was interesting to see if it was savable or not. So completely disassembled the engine, got the rods out, pistons out, crank, everything, bearings, and just had it down to bare block and the head, bare head, just with springs and retainers and valves. We get it over to the machine shop out here in Orlando, Florida, in Maitland, CW Pence Rebuilders. Great job, great team over there. Shout out Jeff. He's definitely been awesome as a part of the entire process. And I say, hey Jeff, here's what happened. I want to see if you can save this. Sure enough, Jeff says, yep, we sure can. Jeff's diagnosis as to what he believes could have happened was an improper tune on the car. So coming from Puerto Rico to here, there is a change in atmospheric pressure. The day I picked up the vehicle, which was some point late November last year, it was also very cold. And this car has lived its entire life in Puerto Rico, and it was tuned in hot, humid, muggy weathers. And here on that particular day, it was not at all. It was very nice. It was somewhere in the 50s to 60s. So for the first time in the car's life, it's seen cold air, and it was great. The car loved it. The car felt amazing. However, the tune does not compensate for all of that. So immediately, what we believe could have happened was, with the extra cold air is dense air, it could have snuck in a couple extra pounds of boost, and it spiked. And sure enough, we were able to see on a log that it did. Its target boost was 30 pounds, and it snuck in 33. So an extra 3 pounds of boost, if the engine does not know that it is coming, it can definitely cause some damage, and that is pretty much what seemed to have occurred here. So we leave the head and the block over with Jeff, and he says, hey, I can fix everything, that's not a problem, let's get everything all put back together. Great. A couple weeks go by, and I get a call from him to come visit him at the shop, and when I come by, he points out a bent rod. Interesting, because on the cylinder walls, it's 2 cylinders that I had low compression, I did notice very light scoring on the walls, not enough to where I was scared, but enough to where I was like, this should be able to be fixed, but it definitely alerted me as to what could have happened in those cylinders. Sure enough, those were the 2 cylinders that the rods were bent in. I am running the Science Performance, the high performance rods, and they are more than capable of holding the power that the car was putting out. But in this particular case, when the head gasket failed, we were mixing oil and coolant, and I did find that out upon engine disassemble. There was milkshake in certain areas of the engine, and so we do know that there definitely was coolant and oil mixing. If coolant gets into the combustion chamber or into the cylinder, it is very, very difficult, and it will not happen, for the engine to be able to compress water. That's what coolant is essentially. So when the rods came up and there was coolant in the cylinder, it did damage and bent a rod, 2 rods to be exact. We've got that squared away, got a set of rods onto the car, but then run into issues where we found out that the cylinder head was cracked a couple of weeks later. This is the actual head I have here in front of me, and I want to demonstrate in the areas that it cracked and how that can cause as well compression issues. So here's the head, and you can see in a couple of different areas, I will point out here, that there are cracks into the head. Now this is completely cracked, so this isn't something that we could weld and machine or cut or fill. This was a complete crack through the cylinder head, which is very unfortunate and required me to get a new cylinder head, which we were able to purchase, thankfully. I get the new head over to Jeff, and I think that, you know, again, the crackage on the cylinder head, kind of a little difficult to explain on why exactly that may have happened, but the improper tune, perhaps detonation or pinging, essentially just everything dates right back to the car not being tuned to be here. So as of now, we've also found out that the only thing that was salvageable from this entire engine was the block. As of lately, I found out that as well, the pistons, the skirts on the pistons collapsed, fortunately. So we are going to have a custom set of pistons made here upcoming really soon, and that will be going on. But again, I think this video is very important to just talk about what all happened and how it happened and how we can prevent this, and talk about some exciting features that we're going to be doing to the engine to prevent this issue from further happening, even when the vehicle is properly tuned. So I currently have the valve cover on the engine. There is nothing under the valve cover. It is a bare head, but just to give those viewers an idea, the engine is currently mounted in the same position as it would be, or the head is currently mounted in the same position as it would be, as if it was under the hood of the car and you were standing in front of it. So under the valve cover, here's, you know, your oil cap would be here. If we remove this valve cover, it's going to expose our bare cylinder head here. So one of the issues that I found out, and I would like to make a special mention to Alex at AA Performance, he's down in southern Florida. He mentioned that one of his beliefs on this particular engine, the point of failures, even with the proper tune, the platform has seen issues with blowing head gaskets. It is a fairly common thing. These cars run at very high boost pressures, even in a factory standpoint. We are going to see head gasket failures on this particular vehicle, and one of the hypotheses of what we found out and why we believe that's true is because the head gaskets on this engine are pencil thin, probably thinner than my pinky, to give you an idea. I don't have one in front of me to show you, but I will do a video on showing the differences between a different style Honda engine and the L15 head studs. So one thing they do in performance whenever trying to up boost pressure or go for high horsepower numbers is they stud the engine, and what that entails is drilling bigger holes onto the engine in the engine hole. So on the cylinder head, they're bored over bigger, and on the block to have a thicker stud. The thicker the stud is, the more clamp force the cylinder head has to the block. Therefore, we can achieve a better seal. At high boost pressures, you have issues with popping head gaskets, and we don't want to run into that issue. So this is going to promote the proper sealage of the engine. On the factory block, you're going to notice that there is a significant amount of room in between where the actual stud sits in the block and the surrounding surface area. So to give you an idea, if this were the hole on the block, the stud would sit in here as such. And all this area that's around is all open space. On most engines it isn't that way, but on this particular engine it is. And so that shows that there is room for a bigger stud. And so we are currently in development to find out a different stud that works for these engines that'll bolt right in, and or if we were going to need a different stud that will require modification. But I think that is the first step into looking for a better seal on these engines to prevent issues at higher boost levels. Some of the high horsepower record holders and or world record holding cars have run into issues with these cars lifting heads, and that is one of the main reasons why. So that coverage pretty much concludes today's video. I really wanted to focus on the cylinder head and show you guys the damages that were done to the head as well, but most importantly educate you guys onto when pushing higher boost levels, the risk that you run. And I know a lot of companies say, oh, it's okay, don't worry, they do it all the time. And just because they do it all the time doesn't mean that there aren't going to be any repercussions. As we engage through the series, I want to talk a lot about drop-in things that we can do to the engine that will help. And then for those people that are more spirited drivers and like pushing the car beyond its limits, a couple of things that we're in the midst of researching and developing to help build this engine and create a better seal. So for today, that is pretty much it. If you guys have any questions, please comment down below or shoot me a message on Instagram. My handle will be listed in the description. I'm always here to help and answer any questions. I look forward to continuing with the series. In next week's video, we're going to be diving deep into the engine block and what I've done to the block to help make it better, and some failure points that we need to know about when building these engines. So thanks so much for watching. Again, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. We're very happy for you guys to be here with us. Also following us on the Facebook page as well at XGen Alliance. Chris again reporting. I'll see you guys next time. Peace. Today's video is proudly sponsored by Sirimoto. If you guys never heard of Sirimoto, make sure you check out all of their products for our 10th and 11th gen and all of the generations before. They make a bunch of great kits. I run their flex fuel kit on my car. We've run it on Chris's Type R. Their R&D team is amazing, and they have a bunch of great parts in stock always for these cars. So make sure you reach out to them. You can visit them on procivic.com. They've always been great and an awesome supporter of the channel since day one. So huge shout out to Team Sirimoto and Rudy over there. We are thankful to have you guys as followers, and we are followers of you guys as well.